It started with a glass of champagne. One sip that changed everything. People say betrayal stabs you in the back, but mine came laced with bubbles and laughter. I raised the glass high, smiling at my family gathered around the long mahogany dining table, not realizing that the very people clinking glasses with me had already decided my fate. My name is Thomas Reed. For 60 years I lived as a builder of both houses and relationships. I started with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn pride, worked my way up from swinging hammers on construction sites to owning one of the most successful contracting businesses in our city. I wasn't rich in the way movie stars or oil tycoons are, but I had built a fortune solid enough to give my family comfort for generations. At least, that's what I thought. The night it happened, the house was alive with chatter. My daughter-in-law, Emily, had organized the gathering, ostensibly to celebrate my birthday, though I later learned it was really about something else entirely. My son, Brian, was there with his perfect smile and tailored suit, pouring drinks like he was hosting a gala instead of a family dinner. My nieces and nephews hovered close, whispering behind their hands, eyes darting at me more than they should have. I remember thinking how odd it felt. Normally, birthdays in our house were simple affairs, a cake, a song, maybe a few gifts. But this night was different. The wine was expensive, the table set with fine china, the mood buzzing with something unspoken. And then came the toast. Brian filled my glass himself, a gesture that struck me as strange because he had never cared much for tradition. He lifted his own flute high, his wife at his side, and said, "To Dad, the man who built everything we stand on today." The words were right, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Still, I raised my glass. How could I not? The champagne touched my lips, crisp and cold, but almost immediately something burned in the back of my throat. A strange bitterness cut through the sweetness. My chest tightened, my vision blurred at the edges. Laughter rang around the table as forks clinked against plates, but the room felt like it was tilting. I excused myself, stumbling toward the bathroom, gripping the wall for balance. In the mirror, my face was pale, my pupils blown wide. My hands trembled as I splashed water over my mouth, desperate to wash away the taste. That's when it hit me. The realization was like ice in my veins. Someone had tampered with my drink. I didn't know who, not yet. But as I staggered back to the dining room, forcing a smile, pretending the dizziness was nothing more than fatigue, I caught sight of the way Emily leaned toward Brian, her lips curling in a smirk she didn't bother to hide. That was the moment I understood. My own family was trying to poison me. I didn't let on. I sat back down, picked at my food, and let the night play out as if nothing had happened. They laughed, they joked, they carved my birthday cake, while I quietly pushed the uneaten slice to the side. Inside, though, my mind was racing. Had it been the champagne? Or the food? Who else knew? Why would they risk everything like this? But most importantly, why now? By the time the evening ended and the guests drifted home, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If they wanted me gone, if they were willing to go so far as to slip poison into my drink, then the inheritance I had worked my whole life to secure was the reason. The poison hadn't killed me, but their betrayal had lit a fire in me I never knew I still had. And as I sat alone in that silent dining room, staring at the half-empty bottle of champagne, I made myself a vow. They thought they were playing a clever game for my fortune. But I was going to show them what happens when you try to bury a man who built his life out of nothing. The morning after the party, the bitterness still clung to my tongue. I woke up with a dull ache in my stomach and a pounding in my head. Not the hangover kind, but something deeper, more sinister. I stared at the empty glass on my nightstand and replayed the moment over and over. The way Brian had filled it himself. The way Emily's smirk lingered. Once, I would have dismissed it, called it nerves, indigestion, paranoia. But I knew what I had tasted. I had lived too long, built too much, to mistake poison for wine. I didn't go to a doctor. I didn't file a police report. Not yet. Instead, I made a choice that would set everything in motion. I pretended nothing had happened. I greeted Brian with the same tired smile, thanked Emily for hosting such a beautiful evening, even complimented the champagne. They bought it. They thought the old man was blind. That was their first mistake. Behind closed doors, I began to investigate. The first clue came from the kitchen. After everyone left that night, I had quietly tucked away the bottle of champagne they served me. In the morning light, I examined it. The foil was peeled slightly, the cork damp in a way that suggested it had been tampered with. I placed it in a sealed bag and hid it in the garage freezer. Next came the whispers. I started listening more carefully when family visited. Emily's laughter carried a sharp edge, and Brian grew quieter whenever I walked into the room, as if he were guarding a secret. Once, I caught a hushed conversation between them when they thought I was asleep. "He won't last another year," Emily whispered. "He doesn't have to," Brian replied. My blood ran cold, but I forced my breathing to remain steady, feigning slumber. If they truly believed I was nearing my end, then the motive was clear: money. The fortune I had spent a lifetime building was the poison in their veins. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. I reached out to an old friend, Harold, who owed me a favor from decades back when I had helped him out of a bad contract. He worked in a private lab now, testing everything from water samples to crime scene residue. I brought him the champagne bottle, my hands shaking as I handed it over. "Don't ask questions," I told him. "Just tell me what's in it." A week later, the results confirmed what I already knew. Traces of arsenic, faint but undeniable. That should have broken me. Instead, it steeled me. They wanted me gone quietly, slipping into the grave with no questions asked. But I had no intention of dying on their schedule. If they wanted war, I would give them more. So I began to gather evidence piece by piece. I kept a journal, recording every strange look, every hushed word, every subtle shift in behavior. I photographed documents left on Brian's desk, papers about estate planning, insurance policies, and succession strategies. I printed screenshots of Emily's online orders for rare chemicals and supplements. I moved slowly, methodically, like a craftsman chiseling stone. They could never suspect I knew. If they caught on, they'd try again, and maybe succeed. At dinners, I raised my glass, but never drank. I learned to fake a sip, to let the liquid touch my lips without swallowing. Emily's eyes always flicked toward me when I did. She smiled when she thought I had taken the bait, but her smile faltered when I set the glass back down untouched. The tension built with every passing week. The more careful I became, the bolder they grew. Emily began hovering in the kitchen longer than usual, insisting on preparing my meals. Brian started pressing me about updating my will, his words laced with feigned concern. "Dad, you should get everything in order. You never know what might happen." I nodded, played the part of the aging man finally giving in. I told him I'd think about it, maybe even schedule an appointment with a lawyer. His eyes lit up with greed, and in that moment, I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. Because while he thought he was leading me toward the grave, I was leading him into a trap. The final piece came from Harold. One night, he called me with a quiet urgency in his voice. "Thomas, listen. Whoever tried to poison you, they knew what they were doing. This wasn't some clumsy mistake. It was measured, precise. Someone wanted you out, and they almost succeeded." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. It was no longer suspicion. It was certainty, and certainty demanded action. That night, as I locked away the files I had gathered, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the weary builder who had spent his life providing for ungrateful children. He was something else now. Harder, colder. A man with nothing left to lose, but everything left to protect. If my family wanted me gone, they would have to face the one truth they had underestimated. I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to outlive their schemes. And when the time was right, I would make sure they drank from the same poisoned cup they had raised in my honor. Once you know someone tried to kill you, life turns into theater. Everything becomes a prop. Every word a line you must deliver perfectly. I learned that quickly. The first rule was simple. Never let them see you afraid. Fear breeds mistakes, and mistakes give predators the confidence to strike again. So I played the part they expected, the groggy, fragile patriarch, suddenly fragile. I coughed a little more loudly, shuffled my feet, sat at the wrong edge of conversations. I took naps in the afternoon and talked about my aches, like a man already folding into old age. They ate it. They fed on it. At family dinners, I let Brian steer the topic to taxes and estates. I listened to Emily suggest names of trust advisors she swore she just happened to know. She recommended firms with friendly faces. He praised me for finally thinking ahead. Every time they pushed, I sighed and told them, maybe soon. That delay was gold. It made them impatient. Greed and impatience are a dangerous combination. Outside the house, the plan had to be airtight. You can't win wars with emotion alone. You need allies and steel. I called Sam more often, not just about paperwork, but to get him inside the family's orbit subtly. Sam, with his old construction boots and lawyerly gravity, agreed to visit for dinner, just to catch up. To outsiders, he was my friend. To those who mattered, he was a presence that smelled of consequence. When Sam asked casual questions about property titles or the status of my accounts, Brian's answers slipped. He used language that sounded like planning and proved he'd already been looking. Then there was Rosa. She was discreet as a shadow and twice as efficient. For weeks, she trailed Brian and Emily's new habits, late-night meetings, cash withdrawals, and a particular off-site consultant who specialized in liquidation plans. Rosa handed me files with the ease of someone who'd done this dance before. Screenshots, receipts, CCTV stills from the cafe where Brian sat with a man who sold burial plots like toys. It was sordid, petty, and damning in equal measure. You can't take legal action on suspicion. You take it on evidence. So I stacked mine carefully. Every bank transfer, every whispered plan, every moment they believed they were safe, documented. I saved voicemail messages. I recorded a conversation where Brian, thinking his phone was off, boasted to a friend about how Dad's going to be too weak to fight it. I had Emily on record discussing a final push to convince me to sign a power of attorney. Each file thickened the case, tightened the noose. But documents alone don't win in a family room. Social pressure does. People like I brought to the table, neighbors, old friends, community leaders, they mattered. I began inviting them back in with the innocence of an old man longing for company. I asked Sam to host a small meeting at the community center about charitable giving and publicly announced plans to fund scholarships for kids from broken homes like mine. That announcement was a hammer blow. It publicly rerouted the narrative away from family squabbles and toward philanthropy. It also made the money I intended to protect visible in purpose, not just in ledger lines. And then I baited them. If you want someone to show their true colors, give them a false finish line. I let Emily and Brian believe I was approaching the end. Quiet threats and seeded doubts did that work, so they accelerated. They began suggesting changes to the will more openly, drafting language that would give them strings to pull. They met in hushed corners and assumed nobody outside their bubble listened. That arrogance is the same as sloppiness. It reveals the map to the vault. One evening, I staged the perfect small misstep. I forgot an appointment with Sam and asked Brian to help sort some papers in my study. He came in expecting easy signatures and a quick victory lap. Instead, he entered into a room that smelled faintly of a new spiced tea I'd concocted to calm the stomach. Harmless, but the scent was by design. While he rifled through my old files, his phone buzzed. He answered, voice low, eager, and bragging. Rosa recorded the entire exchange through the study window camera Sam had positioned long before they arrived. When the recording played back to me that night, I felt no glee, only the steady, cool satisfaction of someone whose work had paid off. The recording exposed plans, timelines, the exact phrasing they used when they were certain I wasn't listening. In that voice, he promised her, we'll move fast. Dad won't see it coming. Emily's laugh on the tape stamped it in my head, a brittle, satisfied sound I'd once loved hearing. Still, public exposure wasn't my first move. I knew humiliation hurts, but it's the courts that cut the deepest. So I fed what I had to Sam, and he began to draft the legal architecture that would strip them of both motive and opportunity. Trusts, irrevocable transfers, philanthropy writ in stone, measures that could survive greedy fingers and noisy, emotional protests. We drafted updated terms for medical proxies, powers of attorney, and the will itself. Carefully, legally, immutably. I also began to leverage the community. Quiet conversations with church leaders and colleagues at the union painted a picture of a man giving back. I called a few of my construction contacts and arranged for a small dedication of a scholarship in my wife's name, complete with an announcement at the community center that would be attended by neighbors who could testify to my intent. It was theater in service of security. If the assets were already publicly pledged to causes, it was harder for family to argue otherwise, and the court would see a man plainly invested in the welfare of his community rather than his son's party debts. There was a moral cost to all this. I realized that each move pushed me further from the man who had once been content to stay in the background and let his son fly. perhaps that man would have chosen reconciliation. But when someone pours poison into your cup, forgiveness becomes a luxury you cannot afford. Even as I built the legal fortress, I kept my face soft and my voice small. I answered with simple things. Maybe next week. Let's think about it. I'll talk to Sam. I wanted them comfortable, certain, and careless. That closeness allowed them to expose themselves, to reveal the depth of their contempt. Then came the test I'd been waiting for. I leased a retirement property in the countryside, small, quiet, and intentionally visible. I announced to the family that I'd be moving there to rest and to oversee the scholarship in a new, more direct manner. It was bait. I expected them to move faster, to push the paperwork to capture assets before I moved, to coerce signatures under the stress of relocation. And they did. Like predators smelling blood, they picked up their pace. Emily suggested we finalize the will before the move. Brian insisted on a power of attorney for emergencies. They pushed and pried, their impatience naked. That was the moment I'd been assembling toward, when the time had come to begin closing the trap. I didn't want drama. I wanted permanence. I wanted them to be cut off by law, not by rumor. So I moved forward with the paperwork we drafted. I finalized the trusts, signed the irrevocable deeds for the land, and completed the public charity pledges. Each signature I made was a stitch in a binding garment, one that would not be easily torn. There was a permanence to it that felt merciful in its finality. When the last of the papers were signed and Sam smiled that weary smile that meant the job was done, I felt a weight drop from my shoulders. I was ready. The next act would bring the confrontation, less thunderous than the rumors required, but far more effective. I had collected the evidence the court would need and built a narrative the community would support. They'd given me motive and method in their hubris. I had given them a legal cage. The trap was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a measured response to a violent betrayal. They had chosen poison. I chose the law and silence and the slow, unyielding dismantling of a plan they thought would never be seen. Now, all that remained was to wait for them to walk into it. When you spend months pretending weakness, you learn to savor silence. Every cough, every sigh, every forgetful glance became part of the theater. And when the curtain finally rose, it happened not in a courtroom or a hospital, but around the same kind of dining table where they once tried to kill me. I invited Brian and Emily to dinner. I cooked myself, roast beef, potatoes, the kind of hearty meal my wife used to make on Sundays. I told them it was my way of spending quality time, of smoothing things over after so many tense conversations. They arrived smug, Emily in a silk blouse, Brian already half smiling like a man arriving to collect his prize. But this time, there was another guest at the table. Sam sat at the far end, his old leather briefcase resting on the chair beside him. I introduced him casually. Thought it would be a good idea to have my lawyer here, just to go over some paperwork afterward. Brian's eyes lit up. He didn't even try to hide it. We ate in relative silence. Emily gushed about the wine she brought, insisting I try it. I lifted the glass, let it brush my lips, then set it down untouched. She hid her irritation behind a tight smile. When the plates were cleared, Sam leaned forward. Thomas asked me here tonight to review some documents. He's been considering changes to his estate. Emily clasped her hands together. Brian leaned forward eagerly. I watched them for a moment, the anticipation shining in their eyes. Then I reached under the table and pulled out a thick folder. I laid it in the center with deliberate care. Before we go over anything new, I said, my voice calm, I think it's important we clear the air about what's already happened. Brian frowned. Emily tilted her head. Sam opened the folder and began sliding papers across the table one by one. The first, the lab report from the champagne bottle, confirming traces of arsenic. The second, photographs of Emily's online chemical purchases. The third, transcripts of their whispered conversations, gathered from recordings Rosa had captured. And finally, the crown jewel, the recording from my study, Brian bragging on the phone about how Dad won't see it coming. The color drained from Emily's face. Brian tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway out of his throat. Dad, this is taken out of context. Sam didn't blink. The context is clear, Brian. Attempted financial coercion, premeditated poisoning, and if necessary, we can pursue charges. Emily opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. For the first time in months, my voice didn't tremble. You thought I was blind. You thought I was too weak to fight back. But every sip I pretended to take, every paper I pretended to sign, I was watching. I was listening. I pushed another document across the table, my newly revised will. Every asset locked in trusts, charities, scholarships. Not a single penny left in their names. You wanted everything, I said. Now you get nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. Brian's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. Sam cleared his throat. I've already filed the necessary protections with the court. Power of attorney revoked. Medical proxy reassigned. All assets secured. If either of you attempts further interference, we'll proceed with criminal charges. The last trace of smugness slid off their faces like watered-down glass. They were trapped, and they knew it. Brian shoved his chair back violently, the legs scraping against the hardwood. You can't do this, he shouted. I'm your son. I stood slowly, meeting his glare with the calm of a man who had nothing left to fear. No, you stopped being my son the moment you poured poison into my glass. Emily looked between us, her eyes wide with something that almost resembled fear. She opened her mouth as if to plead, but the words never came. They left in silence, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a long while, Sam and I sat in the quiet hum of the house. The smell of roasted beef lingered in the air, but I couldn't taste it. My hands, though steady during the confrontation, now trembled slightly. It's done, Sam said finally. I nodded. No, it's only begun. Because revenge doesn't end with papers or confrontations. It lingers in the spaces between, at family gatherings where their absence will scream louder than their presence, in the whispers that will follow them wherever they go. They thought they'd buried me. Instead, I had buried them in truth. And as I cleared the empty plates from the table, I realized something. This wasn't just a reckoning. It was survival. The house was quiet after they left. Too quiet. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty chairs where Brian and Emily had sat, their plates still smeared with gravy, their glasses half full. The air still carried the faint scent of the roast beef I had cooked, but now it was tinged with something bitterer, the residue of betrayal laid bare. Sam packed up the folder of evidence, slipping the last document back into his briefcase. He gave me a long look, the kind of look only old friends know how to give. There were no congratulations in his eyes, only the weight of understanding. Winning a war like this never leaves you lighter. It just leaves you alive. You did what you had to do, he said quietly. Then he left, his footsteps fading into the night. I sat down alone at the table, my glass of untouched wine before me. The poison had never killed me, but it had changed me. It had stripped away the illusion that family blood guarantees family loyalty. The days that followed were filled with silence. No phone calls, no visits. Word traveled fast through the family tree, though. Cousins, nieces, distant relatives, they all heard about what had happened, though the details blurred in the telling. Some whispered that I had turned cruel, cutting my own son out of the will. Others said Brian and Emily had been plotting something dark. I didn't correct anyone. Let them talk. The truth was in the documents, in the recordings, in the poison I had tasted. I didn't need to convince anyone. But the whispers reached Brian and Emily too. Friends began to distance themselves. Colleagues stopped returning calls. The family they had tried to impress no longer invited them to dinners. Slowly, the isolation I had once felt began to wrap itself around them instead. And yet, victory carried no joy. One evening, I went into the attic and opened an old chest. Inside were photographs of Brian as a boy, his first baseball game, the Halloween costume we had made together, his smile as he held up a science fair ribbon. I held those pictures for a long time, my hands shaking, tears I hadn't expected welling in my eyes. That boy was gone. The man who replaced him had tried to bury me. It's a strange grief, mourning someone who is still alive, mourning the child you raised, while staring at the stranger he became. But grief doesn't change truth. I reminded myself, over and over, that I had not acted out of spite. I had acted to survive. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had wanted me erased, swept quietly into the grave, my life's work plundered while my body rotted. That wasn't greed alone, it was annihilation. And I could not allow it. So I made peace with my choices. I finalized the trusts, ensuring the scholarships and charities would receive the fortune I had built. I rewrote my will to make my intentions crystal clear. Every account was locked, every loophole sealed. If Brian or Emily ever tried again, they would find nothing but steel doors. Sometimes, at night, I wonder if Brian regrets it. If he lies awake thinking of that dinner, the evidence sliding across the table, the moment he realized everything was lost. Or if he blames me still, convinced I'm the villain in a story he wrote for himself. Maybe I'll never know. What I do know is this: survival changes a man. Once, I believed sacrifice was enough, that if you gave everything to your family, love and loyalty would be returned in kind. Now I know better. Blood may tie you together, but loyalty is a choice. And when loyalty dies, blood means nothing. Emily and Brian wanted me gone. Instead, I outlived their schemes. And as I sit on my porch in the early mornings, watching the sun rise over the land I built with my own hands, I feel something I never thought I'd have again: peace. Not joy, not forgiveness, just peace. They thought the poison would kill me. Instead, it killed whatever bond remained between us. And I can live with that.